Hello, and welcome to our third lecture in our sixth module on Cognition online. Today we're going to be talking about suggestibility and reconstructive processes in memory, as we've been talking about everyday processes in memory. In our previous lecture we talked about source memory and source monitoring, and that's going to be very important as we move into talking about suggestibility and reconstructive processes in memory. In particular, also the things we talked about in the first lecture in this module on constructivist views of memory and Frederick Bartlett's work. So we'll be revisiting some of that as we move through this lecture today. We're going to start with something different today. We're going to do a quick demonstration. This is a demonstration of what's called the Deese, Roediger, and McDermott effect. You'll need a piece of paper and a pencil. I'd like you to put everything else away and listen very carefully. So we want screen, my voice, paper, and pencil, and that's all. If you want to skip past this, you can do so. You'll get to the screen that has some words on it, but don't do that if you're in my class, because you'll need this for some answers for the quiz. And also, this is a really important part of illustrating parts of what's about to happen in the lecture, so I suggest doing the demonstration, or at least playing along a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some lists of words out loud relatively quickly, and then you'll have 30 seconds to recall as many of those words as you can. So write down every word you can remember from that list. There will be 8 of these lists, and there are, I think, 15 items per list, something like that. And there'll be, as I said, 8 of these. So what we'll do is we'll go through this, as I said, pretty quickly. You'll have 30 seconds after each list. Listen very carefully and try to remember as many words as possible. Then when we get done with this, we'll talk some more about it. We're going to go to a blank screen next, so you can focus entirely on what I'm saying and remembering these words. Okay, so we're going to get ready to start with the first list, and then when I get to the end, you'll have 30 seconds to recall as many words as possible. And we're going to begin now. Butter, food, eat, sandwich, rye, jam, milk, flour, jelly, dough, crust, slice, wine, loaf, toast. Alright, get ready for the next list. Hot, snow, warm, winter, ice, wet, frigid, chilly, heat, weather, freeze, air, shiver, arctic, frost. Okay, get ready for the next list. Nurse, sick, lawyer, medicine, health, hospital, dentist, physician, ill, patient, office, stethoscope, surgeon, clinic, cure. Alright, get ready for the next list. Water, stream, lake, Mississippi, boat, tide, swim, flow, run, barge, creek, brook, fish, bridge, winding. Okay, get ready for the next list. Thread, pin, eye, sewing, sharp, point, prick, thimble, haystack, thorn, hurt, injection, syringe, cloth, knitting. And the next list. Hard, light, pillow, plush, loud, cotton, fur, touch, fluffy, feather, furry, downy, kitten, skin, tender. Get ready for the next list. Shoe, hand, toe, kick, sandals, soccer, yard, walk, ankle, arm, boot, inch, sock, knee, mouth. And our last list. Table, sit, legs, seat, couch, desk, recliner, sofa, wood, cushion, swivel, stool, sitting, rocking, bench. Okay, so what I would like you to do now is take a look at all those words that you've written down in front of you, and I want you to look for the following 8 words. You can of course pause this if you need more time. It's the magic of the internet. But I want you to look for bread, cold, doctor, river, needle, soft, foot, and chair. So when you're finished looking for those, go ahead and hit play again. So, many of you probably had some of those words. Probably many of you had doctor or needle or cold or bread. And the kicker is that I didn't read any of those words. These words that were presented here are what we call critical lure items. And this is an important part of understanding what we call the Deese Roediger McDermott effect, and also a critical issue in source monitoring errors. And we'll talk about the details of this particular experiment in a moment, but essentially what I have just done in those few minutes is I've gotten you to remember something that didn't happen. And that's a really important lesson. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So we're going to start talking about memory as a reconstructive process, then we'll talk about suggestibility, and then we'll finish up with false memories. So we used to think that memory was a reproductive process. That is, we thought it to be a veridical representation, or an exact copy of what we saw, what we heard, what we did. Sort of a tape recorder of an analogy. You know, we've recorded it, we just play it back, and it's all exactly as it was. But we now know that memory is a reconstructive process, and we saw that in Frederick Bartlett's work, where his participants were reconstructing the story in a way that was consistent with their culture and their knowledge and their values, etc. So episodic memories are constructed based on what we experienced, but also our knowledge and our memory. And rarely is memory veridical. In fact, almost never is it an exact copy of what happened, but an approximation of what happened, and oftentimes a molding and changing and forever being adjusted approximation. So memory really is what actually happens, plus your knowledge and your experiences and your expectations and what you've reintegrated over time, what you've added back in, what you've taken out. All of these things add up to what becomes your memory. So what we just did in that demonstration is called the Deese, Roediger, and McDermott paradigm. And this is Kathy McDermott and Roddy Roediger, who are the two people who brought this paradigm back from its original work conducted by Deese. And what happens is you study lists of words that are all related to one word, that critical lure item. So for the bread list that I read a moment ago, butter, food, eat, sandwich, rye, jam, milk, flour, jelly, dough, crust, sliced wine, loaf, and toast are all related to the word bread. The word bread was never read, but the rest of them were. So during that study list, what happens is you automatically think of that critical lure word. It's called an implicit associative response. And in the next module, we'll talk about semantic memories and our knowledge. And essentially what we see in semantic memory is when I activate one word, activation spreads to nearby related associated concepts. So when I say apple, you think orange. When I say banana, you think orange. Or when I think orange, you think banana. All of these things happen automatically. And over time, because you have automatically thought of that critical lure word, you think I actually read it out loud. So at retrieval, you encounter what we call source confusion. That is, you confuse the internal process with an external experience. So that internal implicit associative response becomes an external experience. And you actually then recall hearing the word in my voice. And again, we refer to this as a source monitoring error. And in fact, subjects often will match the voice of the study with a falsely remembered item. So if half the words were read in a male voice and half in a female voice, they'll falsely remember the words associated with the list the male read, and they'll say it was the male. And then they'll falsely associate the items that were associated with the list read by the female with the female. So this demonstrates rather clearly, unfortunately easily and dramatically, that we can easily change somebody's memory. We can alter your memorial experience by simply putting together this kind of memory illusion. So that gets us right to suggestibility. So when we talk about suggestibility, we're talking about a little bit different way of looking at this kind of experiment. So in the experiment we just did, there wasn't even any suggestion, it was just the way these lists were constructed. In the suggestibility paradigm, they capitalized on what's called the misinformation effect. So if we provide some kind of misleading information after an event has been witnessed, oftentimes that misleading information can alter how that person describes the event later, and we call this often misleading post-event information. And so the work we're going to talk about in general is all conducted by Loftus and some of her co-workers starting in the mid-1970s. And there's a whole lifetime of work here. But we'll start with this study where they saw slides of a traffic accident where there was a stop sign. A little bit of misleading post-event information is introduced. So they ask something about a yield sign. And the participants remember what they heard, that is, they remember somebody asking about the yield sign, not what they saw, which is the stop sign. And so basically what's happened is that they've retrieved the memory and they said, well, they said it was a yield sign, it must have been a yield sign, so out comes the stop sign, in goes the yield sign. So when they were given a consistent suggestion, that is, when it was a yield sign, they were 75% correct. That reduces to 40% correct when they were given inconsistent information. That is, they were told it was a yield sign when it was actually a stop sign. And we call this the misinformation effect. And essentially we're getting an alteration of memory by simply introducing one piece of misinformation in one question. So this is not some extended procedure by which we are changing people's memories. It is done in a single episode. In another study on what's called the framing effect, Loftus and Palmer looked at this study about how fast a car was going. So they were watching a film, it would have been in those days, of car traveling down the road, cars colliding, and they're asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed up to collided, or down to collided, in the description of the car accident. So there's a bunch of different adjectives. Let's actually go to this next one. So they were asked smashed, collided, bumped, hit, or contacted. So those hearing smashed said that the cars were going much faster than the words hit. So they heard these, they were asked these different questions about the collision. Cars smashed into one another, hit one another, collided into one another, bumped one another, or contacted one another. And you can see that the speed estimates of the exact same incident, all of these people watched the same incident. They were estimated to be going 30% faster if they were asked how fast they were going when they smashed into one another versus contacted one another. Excuse me. And it's not hard to see what's happening here. We're activating a schema. So when we activate the schema of cars smashing into one another, that indicates a pretty dramatic collision. Hit, bumped, or contacted. Contacted is barely even. They barely touched one another. And so we activate a different schema. And in fact, what they found was that participants' memories changed. So the framing of the question, by simply altering the way the way the question was worded, altered people's memories. People who were asked if the cars were going how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other were more likely to remember the presence of broken glass when there in fact was none. And we're back to a schema activation. So how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? 14% of people say that there was broken glass. When we change that to smashed into one another, it more than doubles to 32% say there was broken glass when in fact there was none. And what you can see is we get different schemas activated when asked those questions. Hit, it sounds like an accident. When they smash into each other, it sounds like a really dramatic collision. And so we see alterations in memory by simply changing the way a single question was phrased. So that gets us right to Loftus's work on retroactive interference and suggestibility. And what we find with retroactive interference is, as we've talked previously, more recent learning interferes with memory for something in the past. And that's essentially what we're talking about here. When we reconstruct a memory, we now include information that occurs after the event as though it were part of the original event. So the original memory trace is not replaced, it's just simply altered. So there's a great study where Loftus and colleagues have people watch a video of a car traveling down a country road, and then they're asked a bunch of questions, and one of them is how fast was the car going when it passed the barn. Then they're brought back sometime later and asked several questions, and one of them is to describe the barn. Well, one of the things they've found is that people were able to describe in great glorious detail a barn that never existed, because there was no barn in the video. But what happens is this. Watch the video of the car traveling down the country lane. How fast was the car going when it passed the barn? Well, now you go back and retrieve that video and think, I don't remember a barn, but they're asking me about a barn, so I must have missed the barn. There's got to be a barn in there somewhere. And so, I don't know, you answer the question, then you come back a week later. Well, now you remember something about a barn because it's included in this whole memory of the event. And so you may have even tried to picture a barn, and now all of a sudden you can describe a barn that never existed, because you can describe a barn, you've seen them before, and so you just take one out of another memory and insert it into this one. It's really that simple. It's nothing more complicated than that. But it really is a dramatic alteration of how your memory is working and the accuracy of your memory. And so if you can change someone's memory this easily about a video watching of a car traveling down the country lane, imagine what you can do in a therapy session or in an attorney's office or when being interrogated by the police over and over again. So this is a really interesting and dramatic finding we have to think about. So these are source monitoring errors because they failure to distinguish the source of the original information. That is, they misidentify the source as being part of the original memory rather than part of that misleading post-event information. It's attributed to the original source rather than that post-event suggestion. So we'll wrap up this discussion of suggestibility by talking a little bit about creating sort of whole, cut-from-the-cloth new memories. In these others, we've sort of taken a memory and added and subtracted a bit here and there. This experiment, Loftus was able to get people to concoct an entire new memory. And so another classic Loftus study where she had participants come in and fill out a whole questionnaire about things they remembered from their past. they brought in their families or parents or somebody and had them ask them the same questions about what had happened to the student. They find a group of people who have no memory of anybody ever being lost in the shopping mall. And they bring the students back, and they say, well, your parents tell us about a time you were lost in a shopping mall. Can you tell us about this? And oftentimes they couldn't remember them. Well, then they're encouraged to do all sorts of things that were in vogue at the time for trying to recover traumatic memories. And so they're told to imagine about it, think about their dreams, there's all sorts of different techniques. And then they come back, and 4 out of the 5 were able to report vivid details of the suggested event. Well, we were shopping for back-to-school clothes, and then this nice woman found me at Macy's, and then we all went for ice cream, a whole dramatic details. And one of the things that's even more startling is one of the participants refused to believe that it didn't happen because her memory was so vivid that she simply thought her parents were lying when they said it didn't happen. Another study by Hyman and coworkers. Participants' parents gave descriptions of childhood experiences. The participant had a conversation about experiences with the experimenter, and the experimenter then added new events. When discussing it later, the participant remembered the new events as actually having happened as part of their childhood. Finally, this all can extend to our own memories, in which people will falsely confess to crimes. And Shaw and Porter have done some study, and this is talked about in the Memory Hackers video that everyone in my class will watch, and if you have not seen it, I highly recommend it. It's a terrific program. I think it's from Nova or Frontline or one of those PBS programs. It's called Memory Hackers. It's really terrific. Basically what they're able to do is to get people to confess to doing something that they hadn't actually done. And that's a really dramatic finding. And in the Shaw and Porter study, what they did is, again, lots of interviews, and they got them convinced that they were arrested for getting into a fight. It's really dramatic. So this is a great study from Elizabeth Loftus. We're all vulnerable to having our memories tampered with. Your memory is not a recording device. It's more like a Wikipedia page. You can change it, but other people can too. So that's a really important lesson for us to think about. And that's where we're going to leave this discussion, and we'll pick up next time on how this all works when we apply it to the courtroom.